Nazi scientists, some of them tied to war crimes, including horrific concentration camp experiments, brought to the U.S. in a secret program to advance American security interests during the Cold War. It sounds like the plot of a film drama, but it actually happened, and on a large scale.
You know how there's always those memes about being dead inside, like when you're dead inside, but you still want to look fancy, stuff like that. And I was always like, yeah, me too.
And it's like a corpse, but it's like
dressed up in pearls and flowers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I was always like, oh, me too, me too. Well, now I truly feel dead inside. So that being said, let's talk about some people that created so many dead people. That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Oh wait, I didn't even say anything about who we were. Hi, this is Creep It Real. I'm Ashley, and that over there is Bianca, of course.
Hi.
Hello. Was there anything that you felt compelled to briefly say?
Yeah, so I just wanted to quickly thank Gabriel and Nicholas for commenting on our Instagram posts and giving us some additional information just regarding the rabbit holes that we can go ahead and go down. Additionally, I just wanted to reiterate how deep this particular subject does go. So if there are any details that we do leave out, please feel free to reach out to us, and we're going to definitely do our due diligence to research as much as possible in all of our future episodes. We do as much as we can. It's a part of history that there are so many branches that go off of this particular subject that it's
listen up. If you want to bring to our attention something huge that we missed and you're doing it in a kind way, great. Otherwise, go stuff it in a sock and throw it in the river with a rock, because I don't care. All right? I don't want to hear it.
No, nobody was saying it. Nobody was saying anything in a mean way. People were just saying, hey, for the next episode, you might want to also touch on this. And which is awesome, because I wouldn't have, the book actually does touch on it, but I delved deeper into it because of it.
Okay, you're touching on a lot of stuff right now.
I know I'm touching a lot.
You're seemingly very perverted right now. I don't know what's going on. You just keep talking about touching on things. It sounds bad. Okay,
it's been so long.
Oh yeah. Oh. All right. So, in our previous episode, are you laughing right now?
I did. Can you start? You're
Little Jimmy Fallon Jr. over here. All right. So, okay. Okay. In our last episode, we discussed some of the heinous things that Nazi scientists and doctors were doing in Germany, and basically just what utter pieces of garbage they were. I mean, that's the gist of it. If you haven't listened, you probably should go back and listen to it first, and then you'll know what we talked about last episode. But to be fair, it's been a few weeks, and I also forgot myself. All right.
Look, it's just been a lot. It's been so much. My brain just feels like mush after this research.
I feel like I'm getting a degree.
I do too. I was saying the same thing. Like, this research feels like I'm studying for some sort of an exam on the Holocaust or something, like on Nazi Germany.
Yeah. So when we ended, I think we were just saying, here we go. Now we're going to go kind of to America soon and see what happens here. So meanwhile, back in Washington, the debate regarding the Nazi scientists became incredibly heated inside the State War Navy Coordinating Committee. I'm telling you right now, why does every name for everything have to have 17 words in it? I don't get it.
As I was typing it out, I was like, okay, so it's called what? And I would have to go back to the book And I'm like, okay.
On everything.
Everything.
So the committee, whose successor was the National Security Council, which much more brief, was essentially the president's tool in dealing with foreign policy and national security. The State Department was pretty vocal about their opposition to the program and had also been putting pressure on South American countries that were providing a safe haven for Nazi war criminals who had escaped Germany after the war, telling them that they should send them back to Europe to face war crime charges. So I guess a little bit of a do as I say, not as I do kind of situation. Mm-hmm. What's new? Obviously, you can see how this would look pretty damn bad if it was then discovered that we were not only providing a safe haven, but actual employment to these same Nazis while chastising other countries. But like I said, what's new? There was a man named John J. McCloy, and he would become a significant player in Operation Paperclip in 1949. But in the summer of 45, just after Nazi Germany lost the war, he had been given two very different responsibilities regarding these Nazis. In one position, he was in charge of coordinating the policies for bringing the Nazi scientists to America under the War Undersecretary Robert Patterson. And in the other, he was helping to create the war crimes program. So he had two pretty significant jobs here, and he believed that the ends justified the means always, and that America was going to be better off to bring these Nazi scientists to America to gain their knowledge and put their expertise to use. In his mind, Nazis and scientists were two separate entities. He believed the scientists were simply providing a great service to their country, and by bringing them here, America would prosper financially and gain military superiority. To McCloy, people like Himmler, Hess, and Goering were worthy of prosecution for their war crimes, but the scientists who did some terrible shit themselves were to be excused because they were the backbone of a healthy economy in this post-war world.
So, just real quick, I wanted to discuss very briefly, because there's just so much information on it, the infamous Japanese Unit 731. Which was also responsible for some of the most notorious war crimes on which was mostly Chinese people. Mm-hmm. Some of these crimes included vivisection, which is the cutting up of a body in order to learn more about the human body, mm-hmm. but this was often performed without anesthesia. Biological warfare, weapons testing, frostbite testing, the effects of syphilis, forced pregnancy, and rape. And honestly, going further into it, there can be a whole series done on Unit 731. So again, it's going to be very light. There are a few topics here that are going to be extremely light because there's so much involved in the specific in those specific operations. Mm-hmm. But reading on this, it was kind of more atrocious. Like, just this, I don't know. Actually, maybe it wasn't more atrocious. It made my stomach hurt more than reading anything about the Holocaust. But I know so much about the Holocaust that already, it's like, is it just new information that was like, oh my God, more people were doing this to people?
Mm-hmm. I actually think that, like, that's probably just something that we'll end up talking about someday.
We have to.
Yeah.
So when the Americans arrived in Japan after their surrender in 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Murray Sanders, who was a microbiologist, had the duty of investigating Japan's biological warfare activity. He had no knowledge of what Unit 731 was. Now, the Japanese were actually quite tight-lipped about the info they gathered. So we threatened to get the Soviet Union involved, and then they spilled the fucking tea. Mm-hmm. Sanders took the info to General Douglas MacArthur, who fucking granted immunity to the physicians of Unit 731 and their leader, Shiro Ishii.
Sounds familiar.
Again, we're going to grant immunity. Mm-hmm. So this was an exchange for providing us, but no other allies, their human experimentation research data. Ishii handed over 10,000 pages of his research, and he was even invited to lecture at Fort Detrick, the U.S. Army Bioweapons Research Center in Frederick, Maryland.
Wow.
We've got to do something on Unit 731, but it's gross.
Yeah, I have read into it a little bit because I found it on like a rabbit hole.
Right.
Like years ago, I think, or like a year or so ago. And I was like, OMG, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway. So at the end of the war, the U.S. Chemical Warfare Service, the branch of the Army that was tasked with defending against chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons, now called the Chemical Corps, had its sights set on bringing Hitler's chemists to the U.S. and were going to do whatever they could to get their mitts on their secrets. Get their dirty mitts on them. So less than a month after the British military found all of those Tabin bombs in the forest, neatly stacked by the thousands that we talked about last episode, the USCWS, which I tried to shorten it. I mean, I didn't make that up, but I'm thinking, if I shorten it, it'll be less of a mouthful, but not really at all. The USCWS had a sample of the nerve agent and was doing everything they could to figure out its properties. Like we talked about last episode, the scientists were gathered at the Kranzberg Castle, where the Nazis had once held that celebration where they were just like launching rockets into Europe and crying about the beauty of it all, which they nicknamed Dustbin. Whoa. You okay?
Sorry.
I thought that was a reaction to Dustbin. I was like, okay. So the scientists were essentially living pretty luxurious lives while the Allies decided whether to prosecute them for war crimes or hire them to work for them. Then there were the Nuremberg trials, which admittedly had very little physical evidence to be used in prosecution, despite what everyone knew to be true about the Nazis.
So in Germany, at the same time as all of these events are happening, Operation Backfire, which was one of two of the British's equivalent of Operation Paperclip, was underway. So essentially, when the British learned about the U.S.'s intentions to hire Germans for our own purposes, they requested to be allowed to conduct their own 2 rocket exploitation projects. The United States agreed and released a group of scientists, engineers, and technicians into British custody, which included Werner von Braun, Walter Dornberger, and Arthur Rudolph. This operation was designed to analyze how the V-2 rocket was launched, its flight controls and fuels, and various other technical elements. And apparently, according to Arthur Rudolph, the V2 ran on alcohol of the same chemistry as that appearing in Jack Daniels, which is a whiskey, and Old Grandad, which is a bourbon. So, I'm also a V2 rocket, so there's that.
I know you got toots like a V2 rocket.
Ashley,
Your toots could launch you to space. Sorry.
Also, Rudolph mentioned that a group of British and German V2 technicians got drunk together on the rocket fuel.
Oh, gosh.
For anybody unconvinced that this may have been the case, when I went through basic training for the Air Force, our brother flight actually got into a ton of trouble for drinking the hand sanitizer we were issued in order to get drunk while we were in basic.
Oh, my goodness.
So I guess we'll do anything to get a little buzz going.
I can't believe that they had enough time on their hands to even try, to even care.
Dude, we were up at 4:45. Why are you trying to get... I'm tired. I just want to sleep.
Yeah. Ugh, that sounds like such a nightmare. Ugh, sorry.
No, that's fine. Anyway, so the British were keeping a close eye on Walter Dornberger, but they were not interested in any capacity in what he knew. And their intent was to try him for his war crimes, even though they originally promised to return him back to the United States. Dornberger was taken to the London district cage for interrogation and then transferred first to a castle in Wales and then Special Camp 11 in South Wales.
So he was racking his brain for a way to get these men to talk and finally came up with the idea to show them footage that they called atrocity films that were taken at Buchenwald. Buchenwald. Sure. I did my best. I did my best.
I did my best. And you did great, Ashley. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. So they showed these men these videos, okay? And although they were there actually committing some of the acts that were shown on these videos, some of them had quite a reaction whenever they saw them. A man later named Walter Funk, probably, I mean, let's call him Funk. He's probably a little funky. He came to Colonel Andrus privately and said he had a confession to make. Funk had been the minister to the war economy and president of the Reichsbank. It was he he later confessed, who made the order to remove the gold from every single prisoner's mouth to be deposited into the bank. He said it had initially been knocked out while the prisoner was alive, but that he soon realized if they were dead, it would be far less of a bother to get the gold out. So basically, they were killing people just to get the gold out easily. It wasn't even remotely like well, they're dead, so let's get the gold out. It was like these people are essentially just like a little tiny gold mines.
Mm.
So he later denied this conversation at the Nuremberg trials months later, which was obviously extremely frustrating. And Colonel Andrus devised a ruse to pick out the most outspoken backstabbers of the group and try to extract information from them with his little ruse.
Oh, are you talking about the car ride where they drove around like 50 miles? And, like,
yeah.
Through like, yeah.
Right. Okay. Yes. Yeah. They drove around and pretended to go to some place, some estate in Germany, and like got out, and the guy was like, yes, this is exactly, I've been here before, I recognize this. Like, what a nerd. He wasn't. It was like a house a block away. They just drove in circles for hours. What a dork. He's like, I've been here, I'm a welcomed guest in this home. Like,
yeah, and then
douche.
And then to kind of get like what's it called, to get kind of info, to dig up dirt on them, they bugged the area in which they were gonna sit.
Yeah.
And then, of course, during that time, it started, like, raining.
Yeah.
And then, after a while, they're like, this is so worthless, and we're spending way too much money, so...
Yeah.
So they took them back to Dustbin, and they didn't take the same, like, amount of time to get back there.
They drove straight there.
They drove straight there, and they were pissed.
Yeah, they were so pissed. And yeah, they were saying like they got their funding cut within a matter of hours because it was just not yielding any results. And I was like, oh, that's too bad. Like,
yeah,
they might have been able to get something if they'd been given enough time, but that's I can't say it. Bureaucracy for you. All right.
So on September 12th, von Braun, Dr. Eberhard Rees, and 5 mid-level V-2 rocket engineers were transferred to Paris, France. Shortly after their arrival, they got on a C-54, which is a military transport aircraft, and it was actually derived from the commercial civilian airliners that we have today. Well, that we have had.
Mm-hmm.
And they headed to Newcastle Airport in Wilmington, Delaware. They arrived on September 20th, and a few hours after their arrival, they hopped on a second smaller plane and were flown to the Naval Air Station at Squantum in Quincy, Massachusetts. Then they were loaded into sedans and driven out to the edge of the dock, boarded a ship, and made their way to the harbor islands in Boston Harbor, obscured by civilian view, thus coining the term Operation Overcast. Again, this was later to be renamed Paperclip. And on 9 days later, on September 29th, after the Germans became super annoyed with their fucking surroundings,
mm-hmm.
you know,
through fits.
The same guys who worked human beings to death, not huge fans of The Mist.
No.
Not excited about it.
Like we said, they could have lasted a grand total of 15 minutes in a concentration camp before they were like, ew, I need to get out of here. God.
Well, then they were escorted off the island, and von Braun was taken to Fort Bliss in Texas.
Cool. By the end of 1946, 160 Nazi scientists had been secreted to America, 115 of them in a secret rocket group in Fort Bliss, Texas, like Bianca just said, led by none other than Werner von Braun. The men lived in two-story barracks on the Fort Bliss reservation and shared a mess hall with Native Americans. Von Braun found the whole thing to be a real cowboy adventure and was quoted as saying it was such a romantic Karl May affair. So Karl May was a German novelist who wrote cowboy and Indian westerns. So he was really romanticizing this whole experience, like a real piece of shit that he is. However idyllic he found the desert landscape and surroundings, von Braun was extremely disappointed in the funding that they received for their research and what they were able to do in the first year of his working for the U.S. government.
Hey, be grateful that you're alive. That you didn't have to
dead.
You could have been hanged at the Nuremberg trials. You could have been incarcerated for the rest of your life. Should be grateful, but
no, He's like, I'm not making enough money, okay? I don't have the medical benefits that I was expecting I was going to receive.
What is your 401k match? It's only 2%? That's bullshit. Fuck you.
So it made von Braun realize that they'd been coddled over in Nazi Germany, which you don't say, you plate eating bitch. Like, God. So in April 1946, they finally launched the first B-2 rocket, and it went up 3 miles. Although one of the fins fell off, von Braun felt positive enough about the test to suggest that they merge his missile with the atomic bomb. So this proposal was named Use of Atomic Warheads in Projected Missiles and was sent to the Army. And in this proposal, he discussed building a rocket that could hold 2,000 plus pounds of nuclear payload that would travel a distance of 1,000 miles. During this time, von Braun was undergoing some personal changes in that he became a born-again evangelical Christian and married the daughter of his mother's brother. So his cousin, who was half his age and had just turned 18 that year. She also still lived in Germany, so she must have had some magical pussy to have such a hold on him from across the old pond.
Across the old pond.
Funding for the rocket program post-war was dwindling, and they found that some of the Nazi scientists, quote-unquote, had oversold their knowledge and what they brought to the table. Some ended up being in charge of food services back in Germany, and others who had been sold as, quote-unquote, eminent scientists were actually schooled on engineering as they worked for the army after the war. So it was basically a kind of situation where they were like, I am a fucking genius. This is a genius. This is a genius. We all have technology that you need to know. And then they were like, no, the technology was the good old oven.
The good old oven.
I knew how to use a spatula and an egg beater. So, not so great.
Thousands of miles away, a smaller group of Nazi scientists living at Wright Field in Riverside, Ohio, sent complaints about their dismal living conditions, their lack of challenging work, and the cultureless surroundings in which they were placed. Go fuck yourselves. Nazis.
Yeah.
Also, let me tell you, I was stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. I mean, They weren't wrong.
Right.
But fuck you.
Right.
Complaints of lack of culture coming from people who stole gold from people's mouths and decided it was easier to extract if they just killed them first. Like,
yeah. Hypocritical. Yeah.
It's super hypocritical.
Meet your kettle. Yeah.
Mm.
These complaints were levied against the U.S. government by saying that these scientists were beginning to, quote-unquote, distrust the people who they were working for, which is the biggest eye roll comment I might have ever heard in my life. You know, You're a goddamn Nazi. You are being mistakenly trusted to work for the U.S. government in some capacity. They think that you're not going to betray them. And you're sitting here saying, I can't trust you, so I'm going to use that against you and try to blackmail you, essentially, is what they were doing.
And by the way, they're all fucking lying every time. So we'll see in a second what happens But they all like start lying to try to cover their fucking tracks.
Right.
And it's like, of course so to me, it's like if that's the type of person you are, that's exactly what you're going to see in somebody else. Like you're going to, if you're a piece of
project,
shit,
yeah,
you're going to project and you're going to see the thing in you that you don't like in the other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so
sorry.
It's good. In addition to their dissatisfaction with their current roles working for the U.S., these men were also receiving lucrative offers from Russia and France in the mail, sending the Air Force commanders into a panic. So it was essentially a perfect storm of them scrambling to cave to these Nazi shitheads, essentially. You know, they were like, we need them. We can't lose them. We got to keep them. So they need to, like, have their buns buttered. Butter them buns.
At the same time, the Joint Intelligence Committee had come to the conclusion that if they weren't careful, the Soviet Union would quickly surpass the U.S. in atomic research and guided missiles, while also surpassing the U.S. in various other areas of military importance. So, again, it was kind of a perfect storm to just kiss the Nazis' asses.
Ugh. Kissing
so
Nazis.
we could be the most powerful.
It should be kick a Nazi's ass is what it should be. Sadly, what they did not know at the time was that the Soviets were not making such amazing strides in these areas due to German intelligence, but with moles that were placed at the facilities here in the U.S. and sending information back to them. So the JOIA, the Joint Offices of Intelligence, what the fuck is it? Joint Offices Intelligence Association.
You're just saying the words. I'll say it right now.
The JIA.
JIOA.
The JIOA, the Joint Intelligence Objectives Association.
Ashley.
Say it for me.
The JOIA. Fuck me. Hold on. Have you seen that video? Have you seen that video where they're in a restaurant, they're in a diner, they're talking about the chicken pot pie, and they're like,
yes,
a crispy, flaky crust.
Yeah.
That's how I feel right now. Okay. The JIOA, or the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, quickly implemented 3 changes to the Nazi scientist program. 1 was to do everything possible in Germany to prevent any more scientists from going to work with the Russians. 2 was that the United States Army was to give these scientists and their families whatever they were asking for, including U.S. visas. And finally, a list was drawn up proposing that over 1,000 additional German scientists be brought over to work on the program.
They were in a panic.
A
total panic. The visa issue was a slightly difficult one because the process was intensive and long in duration.
The State Department was supposed to interview contacts given by each applicant, and their entire histories in regard to the Nazi Party was to be scrutinized. Although this was typically the case, the JIOA argued this process needed to be sped up to prevent scientists from going to Russia.
At this point, the focus had shifted from whether these scientists were Nazi pieces of shit to whether Russia wanted them for their own science development. It was more of a, you want them? Well, no, I want them type of situation. For men that were of particular concern, those who'd received high honors for their important contributions to the Nazi Party, the Army intelligence officers reviewing the files came up with a clever workaround. For the most troublesome cases, they would discreetly attach a paperclip to the file. These files would then not be presented to the State Department for their visas just yet, and they would instead remain under military custody in America much longer than most of their fellow Germans. Thus began the new nickname for the Nazi scientist program, Operation Paperclip. Soon, the JIOA changed the language of the core principle guiding the program from no known war criminal and no active Nazi to persons who might try and plan for the resurgence of German military potential as a way to bypass the visa people, as the Assistant Secretary of War wrote in a memo in July 1946. So basically, they changed it from we know he's a piece of shit to we don't think he'll try to destroy us. So, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So as time wore on, it became increasingly obvious that the Soviet Union and the United States could not coexist peacefully, and that they were preparing for conflict. The Russians were developing atomic bombs, guided missiles, biological and chemical weapons programs, and a strategic air force. It was determined the only way to counter this would be not with military force, but military threat.
This was the impetus needed to get President Truman to sign off on Paperclip, extending contracts and giving the government the right to extend them for years in the future. What had initially been installed as a temporary program was now becoming a more permanent one, and these Nazi shitbags were now up for the possibility of U.S. citizenship.
At some point, the U.S. Army was employing men like Dr. Kurt Blome, Hitler's biological weapons maker and Deputy Surgeon General of the Third Reich. Blome had nearly completed a bubonic plague weapon when the Red Army captured his research institute in Poland.
Dr. Hubris Sturghold, who was in charge of the Aviation Medical Research Institute of the Reich Air Ministry.
Jesus Christ, again, one of those 7,000... word.
Oh, it's international, that ridiculous shit.
Let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you something right now.
Okay, go for it.
When I was in the military, I was a bioenvironmental engineering technician. I worked in hazmat. Well, I don't know why we didn't just say hazmat.
You contributed to the problem. Okay, Bianca. Way to go.
I wasn't high up enough. Fuck.
Oh, okay. And so he was another one that was in this little gaggle of
giggling girls.
Giggling gals. Dr. Theodore Benzinger, who was the director of the experimental station of the Air Force Research Center. And he was an officer with the Stormtroopers, which I am sorry, I thought was only on Star Wars. But it's not. I don't remember that from school. I'm sorry. And Dr. Hermann Becker Freising, who oversaw medical experiments on prisoners at Dachau, among a slew of other Nazi doctors.
And in one day, in mid-September of 1946, military officials with the Counterintelligence Corps came and arrested these men for war crimes, and they were imprisoned in Nuremberg while they awaited their trials. Obviously, there would be a huge scandal if it was discovered that the Army Air Force was not only employing war crimes suspects, but that some of them were even conducting research in Germany, which was expressly prohibited by the Allied peace agreements.
When the trial for the doctors began, it was exposed that these men, who were virtually unknown to the general public at that point, had conducted medical research experiments on concentration camp prisoners that included freezing experiments, seawater drinkability tests, high-altitude tests, malaria tests, mass sterilization, and euthanasia, all things that we discussed last episode. The New York Times called these doctors' crimes beyond the pale of even the most perverted medicine, and even said that some details were too difficult to report because they were beyond comprehension. For one example, perfectly healthy Jews and Slavs had been murdered at the request of SS physician Dr. August Hirt for the university skeleton collection of the Untermeichen. This little bitch ended up committing suicide just before the trial began, though. So, I mean, I'm just saying. I'm not saying that. I'm not making judgments about suicide. I'm making judgments about this little bitch committing suicide. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Well, Dr. Benzinger went from being super high on the priority lists of Nazi doctors to prosecute to being mysteriously removed from the lists, from being a witness in future trials, and was released back to the United States Army, as discreet as can be. Always a church mouse.
Interesting. It took decades for a Nuremberg trial expert to reveal that Dr. Benzinger had recently written a paper on stratospheric or extremely high altitude aircraft, making him valuable enough to the Air Force that they were willing to do a little work to let him slide on back into their DMs. While a bunch of less important doctors awaited their trial at Nuremberg with the possibility of facing death as punishment, 34 other doctors were waiting to be shipped over to the U.S. for employment. That, I mean, I gotta say, they all suck ass, but it's pretty fucked up to be like, well, you know, you're really valuable, so we're gonna let you come work for us, but the rest of you, we're gonna fucking shoot you in the head.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, they all deserve to be shot in the head, maybe.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Yes. I mean, I guess you can say.
But then that goes into the, do they? Like,
I don't know.
Then do the, exactly. It's such a fucking catch-22. Like, it's such a catch-22, dude. I've been, since doing this research, I'm like, okay, but then we wouldn't have all of the information that we have now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's, anyways, okay.
Okay.
While all of this was going on, sentences were also being handed out for some of the war criminals whose trials had gone on before the doctors. The eventual verdict was 19 convictions, 12 death sentences, 3 life sentences, and 4 lengthy prison terms. The men were hanged in the Nuremberg gymnasium a few days later, where a makeshift gallows was created.
Following their hanging, the men who had perpetrated the atrocities of the Holocaust, mind you, their bodies were transported to the Dachau concentration camp and cremated in the camp's ovens.
Yeah.
So I said, tit for tat, you fucking assholes. Their ashes were then thrown into a river.
Yeah.
That's how I was laughing. I'm like, what's going on? I guess it's just such vengeance.
It feels like it feels so good to like hear that that their bodies. I mean, they weren't in as much agony and pain as the people that they tortured.
Yes,
but at least you got the final fuck you.
Right. Yeah.
So being a Nazi post World War II was a confusing time. Some of them were executed for what they'd done. Some had pretty fancy jobs with the U.S. government, and others were left in limbo, awaiting their fates at Nuremberg. Although the distinguishing criteria may seem pretty sketchy and ambiguous, there is one thing that seems pretty evident. If you've got a brain that'll benefit the country and strengthen the war machine, then you're all good when it comes to all that Holocaust stuff.
Right. Eventually, the JIOA would begin bringing Nazi doctors and scientists in to work for America under aliases and secret transport, because they knew the kind of shitstorm it would cause if they were found out, and rightfully so. This was the case with Major General Schreiber, who was the Surgeon General of the Third Reich. So Schreiber injected men deemed troublemakers with lethal intravenous phenobarbital injections as a way to, quote-unquote, get rid of them. He was a loyal Nazi who was awarded many distinctions by the Third Reich and was said to have constantly profited from being a party man. And we're not talking about the fun kind. We're talking about a Nazi party kind. But America wanted him and his knowledge of the production of biological weapons, and so he made good friends with this Brigadier General Charles Lukes, who interviewed him to see what information he could gather about the manufacture of nerve gas, which Schreiber told him he played an important part of from the beginning. He explained that he worked closely with Farben chemists who were working on these weapons and that he was close with all of them. Lukes had such a great time with Schreiber that he invited him back to his house for drinks. He would then set up further meetings with him to attempt to get more information about the men who would be able to help him with this nerve gas production in the United States, and told Schreiber that he would most assuredly be compensated for his information and assistance. Lukes and his wife held dinner parties where Schreiber was an esteemed guest, as Lukes had really taken a liking to the man, and he even wrote glowing things about Schreiber in his goddamn diary. He was incredibly willing to overlook Schreiber's history as a Nazi shithead, and years later, he would tell a historian a story that helps elucidate why that is the case. He was talking about how during World War II, Luke served as a chief chemical officer for the army, producing bombs that were used to destroy over 67 Japanese cities, and millions of Japanese citizens were murdered, obviously. He would go out in a jeep and tour the countryside, photographing the destruction and the dead. And one day he came upon a huge pile of dead bodies that were stacked alongside some of the very bombs that he had created that had been used to kill all these people who laid there dead. And he took a photograph of himself beside the bodies and the bombs. He says it was to show the effectiveness of the bomb that he had helped create.
History really is written by the winners.
You know what I'm saying? For sure.
Like, fuck you. Like, you did the same, like, we did the same fucking thing. We did the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems that he was able to detach himself from the horror of what he had created and was very ready to do the same with Schreiber, because really, in the end, is there really much of a difference between the outcomes of either of these, situations? No.
Sorry, I jumped the gun there.
It's fine. Jump the gun all you want when we're talking shit about Nazis. Eventually, and our just shitty fucking government stuff. Anyway, eventually, Lukes told Schreiber that he wanted him to bribe the Farben chemist who had been in charge of producing sarin gas with contracts with the U.S. if they would help him develop these weapons, which of course Schreiber said yes to. So from there began a months-long process of Hitler's chemists meeting with Schreiber at Lukes' home for a round table of sorts to produce detailed reports about how to produce industrial amounts of sarin gas. These men became such pals that they exchanged gifts and Christmas cards, and I guess were really drawn together by their ability to turn off their morality for a cause.
Fuck, dude.
Yeah. This relationship, while not approved of by some at the Pentagon, was simultaneously financially supported through covert means by siphoning it through various divisions that wouldn't tie the support directly to those giving it. And this sounds incredibly similar to how projects like MK Ultra were later carried out, as you should go listen to episode 34, 35 to hear all about that if you're interested in hearing about MK Ultra. because we covered it in episode 34 and 35. These roundtable sessions that the Nazi chemists would be having, these roundtable sessions with the Nazi chemists would be hidden from the public for over 60 years. It was a Cold War black program that wouldn't officially exist and had no checks and balances. So awesome.
Around this time, in 1947, the CIA was created when Truman signed the National Security Act into law. And it was only months into the creation that they began working with Operation Paperclip and the JIOA. They were nonstop sending memos back and forth, getting information from each other regarding the Nazis we were employing or interested in employing over in the U.S. There were over 18,000 scientists we were wheeling and dealing.
That's a lot of dudes.
18,000?
Right.
Jesus.
They also very quickly issued a directive regarding who was producing what intelligence, where it was coming from, and how it was being dispersed and coordinated throughout the various agencies, which was something that wasn't happening at that time. What was created from this was the Scientific Intelligence Committee, which prioritized 8 primary areas of warfare: atomic energy, biological warfare, chemical warfare, electronic warfare, guided missiles, aircraft, undersea warfare, and medicine, which was every single area involving the Operation Paperclip scientists.
Eventually, the U.S. was panicked enough about the Cold War and the Russians that they created a whole process to essentially give these scientists immediate visas to work in the U.S. They would take them over to the border of Canada or Mexico under military custody and present them with documents signed stating they were very important and needed by the U.S. government, and would re-enter the country as visa-holding citizens no longer in military custody. So in fall of 1951, 4 years after he was an expert consultant to the Secretary of War during the Nuremberg doctor's trial, Dr. Leopold Alexander was living in the United States. He was a regular reader of a medical journal and had just joined the United States Air Force School of Aviation Medicine in Texas at Randall Air Force Base. And because he was so familiar with the Nuremberg trial, he was also extremely familiar with Schreiber's testimony. Clearly, he was appalled.
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote to the director of the Massachusetts Medical Society and said, quote, I regard it as my duty to inform you that the record shows that Dr. Schreiber is a thoroughly undesirable addition to American medicine. In fact, an intolerable one.
Yes.
He has been involved as an accessory before and after the fact in the worst of the medical war crimes which were carried out by the Nazi government during the war, and was a key person in perverting the ethical standards of the members of the medical profession in Germany during the war.
Yes, bitch. Yes, bitch. Finally, somebody said something.
I know, dude.
He positively demanded that Schreiber be barred from practicing medicine in the United States when he didn't get the response he expected, which I'm sure was, what? We had no clue. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. He contacted the Boston Globe.
So investigators don't play, dude.
Yeah. Hell yeah, man.
At 10:30 p.m. At 10:30 p.m. If I get a call at 10:30 p.m.
Like, what are you screaming that for? Calm down. Okay, I get it.
If I get a call at 10:30 p.m., I'm not answering. What the fuck? Who's calling it?
Listen up.
Anyways.
I don't answer my phone for anybody. Nobody.
At 10:30 p.m. on December 8th, 1951, he received a phone call from someone named Mr. Brown, who explained he was from the Boston Globe. He asked, "Are you the individual who performed experiments on the bodies of live Polish girls who were interred in German concentration camps during World War II?" Schreiber replied that he had never worked in a concentration camp and he had never conducted, ordered, or condoned experiments on humans of any nationality. The following morning, the Boston Globe published an article with the headline, "Ex-Nazi High Post with the United States Air Force says medical man here." Schreiber was called into OSI, the Office of Special Investigations at Randolph Air Force Base, to provide details of the call he received the night before. He confirmed that during World War II, he was essentially the equivalent of the Surgeon General, but for the Germans, and that his story, his quote-unquote struggle, was so much more than that.
Oh. So he said that he feigned compliance with the Russians, and he had been captured by and was awarded a high position with the East German Polizei. But instead of taking the job, he is scared.
Fuck you. Fuck you. I knew you were going to do that. I knew you were going to do that, even though I was reading your typos just fine.
I'm not trying to be rude, because I thought that's what you were trying to say. I literally thought you were trying to say that. Oh my god. Oh shit. Okay. But instead of taking the job, he escaped. He then lied to the Air Force, OSI, and cool it, lady. But instead of taking the job, he escaped, and he then lied to the Air Force, OSI, and said that he had met Alexander, who gave him a clean bill of health. Because the security offices at Randolph Air Force Base, didn't have the clearance that allowed them to access Schreiber's JIOA file or his OMGUS report, which is something OMG. Yes?
OMGUS.
That's ridiculous. That's longer than a word. That's literally longer than a word. Listen up. His OMGUS report. They didn't know where he was. All anyone knew was that he was a German scientist, part of Paperclip, and they had already employed 34 other German scientists.
On December 14th, the FBI got involved, but the United States Air Force was unwilling to give him up. Well, at this time, there was also public outrage because of the Globe article, and the Pentagon now got involved. The issue was sent to the Office of the Surgeon General of the United States, which was now held by Harry Armstrong. He had a lot to lose both personally and professionally by this, since he had personally recruited 58 former Nazi doctors, 5 of whom had been arrested for war crimes, 4 tried at Nuremberg, 2 convicted at Nuremberg and 1 acquitted, and rehired by the United States Air Force before being revealed as incompetent and fired. Since he didn't want that getting out, his suggestion was that they simply not renew his original 6-month contract, or even terminate it early. Armstrong also stated that General Benson, the commandant of the School of Aviation Medicine, agreed with this recommendation, and 2 weeks after the scandal broke, Benson delivered the news that they would not be renewing his contract to Schreiber in person.
According to Schreiber, who isn't the most credible source, but none of these individuals are, Benson also proposed a secret alternative plan for his career in America. He swore that Benson stated that he felt sure his services could be utilized in other branches of the government or medical schools, and offered his assistance in soliciting a position for him.
Now, Janina Ivanska was at this time a 27-year-old survivor from Ravensbrück concentration camp. She delivered her testimony, which is generally regarded as among the most powerful evidence presented at the trial of Nuremberg. While imprisoned at 17 years old, she had her legs broken, and Karl Gebhardt, Schreiber's direct subordinate, had pieces of her shin bones removed.
Jeez Louise.
Then he ordered that her surgical wounds be infected deliberately with bacteria to cause gangrene, and treated them with sulfa drugs to see if they worked.
Oh my god.
So her story is coming out at the same time as the news on Schreiber.
Mm-hmm.
So the matter just continued to gain traction and more outrage against him.
Good.
The FBI contacted Ivanska in January of 1951, and under oath in New York City, she identified Schreiber from a photograph as a high-ranking doctor who had overseen the medical experiments at Ravensbrück. Of course, remember, Schreiber claimed he had nothing to do with the Ravensbrück bird experiments and never even visited a concentration camp.
Oh, Jesus. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and she was accusing him of outrageous acts. Her response to hearing that he had said that was, I had an operation done on my legs by Dr. Gebhardt, and during the first dressing after the operations, I asked why they did the operation. And his answer was, because you were condemned to die. She also said that the number tattooed on her legs were TKM3, and that if Dr. Schreiber cannot remember my name, I'm sure perhaps he can remember the experiment number.
Oh, sick, but so probably true.
Operations were done on 74 women. 5 died 2 days after the operation, and 6 were shot after. When asked if she knew if Schreiber ordered these experiments, she said she had only knew he was very interested in it.
What a creep. At this time in Texas, Schreiber began planning an escape to Argentina and wrote a letter to his daughter about how he could get a visa fast. The FBI intercepted the response that he would be able to get one within 14 days, and that they had always feared that this would happen to him. Well, even though they intercepted the letter, they came up with the brilliant notion to help Schreiber move to Argentina, quote-unquote move to Argentina. Keep in mind, Operation Paperclip was unknown to the public, so if the U.S. held hearings to investigate Schreiber, there could be extreme backlash all the way to the president.
So Schreiber gave multiple interviews. In one, he said that he was, quote, fighting for justice because everything said about him were lies.
What a
in another,
goober.
He released a statement saying he never worked in a concentration camp. And then in another, in which he clarified, no, he had visited one without knowing it was a concentration camp in eastern Pomerania to inspect a delousing treatment.
Oh.
I mean, I guess he just didn't catch the emaciated prisoners or the barbed wire surrounding the camp. But, small things, small details.
Yeah, little details.
JIOA Director Colonel Heckmeyer was asked by Time magazine what the Air Force was going to do if Schreiber was found guilty of the war crimes. And he said, we're not going to make a Nuremberg trial 3 days after they have closed. However, the Secretary of the Air Force made a statement that Schreiber would be dropped from his contract, put under military custody, and would leave the United States at once.
Bitch.
Schreiber knew he had the Air Force by the balls because if any of these high-ranking officials was forced to admit what they knew all along about him, it would be a crazy scandal, and he refused to leave the United States. He and his family moved to San Francisco, California. A month later, Brigadier General Otis Benson... Do you want to read that?
No.
A month later, Brigadier General Otis Benson, the commanding general at Randolph Field School of Aviation Medicine, sent a letter that, quote, sought continued employment for Schreiber, preferably university appointment, to the Minnesota School of Public Health. The Air Force had, at this time, promised that Schreiber would be leaving the United States. The Physician Forum's board of directors demanded that President Truman order the Attorney General to open an investigation into the case.
A few days after their demand, Lieutenant Colonel Little, who represented the Joint Chiefs of Staff, flew to California to persuade Dr. Schreiber to go to Buenos Aires at once, which he voluntarily and immediately did. He was paid for transportation to South America and funds for travel, and the amount he was paid was never disclosed and not mentioned in the declassified Operation Paperclip file. Senate hearings never happened, and the Attorney General never opened a case. He lived in Buenos Aires until he died in 1970, like a real piece of shit.
So, at the time Schreiber left to Argentina, Operation Bluebird expanded to include the use of drugs and chemicals in unconventional interrogation. Kurt Blome was Camp King's postdoctor at this time, and he worked on a top-secret project that had since never been declassified. It was titled Army 1952 Project 1975, and it is at this time Blome's file becomes empty. And just to touch super lightly, because again, there can be a whole series on these particular tests, Bluebird was renamed Project Artichoke, and then later morphed into Project MK Ultra, which again goes into the episodes.
Yeah, 34, 35.
Right. Which was the CIA's interrogation program that used drugs such as LSD that could be used to control human behavior. We didn't want to lag behind the Russians, who had recently purchased enough LSD-25, reputed to be sufficient for 50 million doses.
Or, if you're me, a couple weeks. Just kidding. I'm totally kidding on that one. For real.
Well, later, it comes out that the CIA analysts working on the report missed a decimal point, and they had actually only purchased enough for a few thousand tests.
Oh, maybe.
So, 2 days for you.
Couple hours. No, I mean, honestly, I can't even tell you the last time I did that, but regardless. Okay. Eventually, in 1952, the unregulated beast that was Operation Paperclip was taken down a few notches due to West Germany's new government saying that the operation violated NATO regulations and even, Americans' own policies, which we already knew. It was said that if Paperclip wasn't curtailed a bit, that there would be a violent reaction from the new German government. So, the JIOA began to scale back its involvement and growth of the program. So that said, the CIA isn't restricted by those same NATO policies, so they of course continue to recruit and hire Nazis to work for them in their warfare party. This is where the partnership between the JIOA and the CIA began to crumble to bits, and the JIOA grew increasingly more furious by the CIA as days passed. The JIOA was essentially throwing fits because the CIA was pretty much just like, those rules don't apply to me, bitch. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And they were like, but we have rules, so they were fighting, yada, yada. Boo-hoo. It's the good old, because essentially all these groups are comprised of all these esteemed men, and these same men are like, women are too emotional to have these types of positions. And then they're over here like throwing fits constantly and, doing all this little whiny ass bitch shit. Anyway, in 1962, the JIOA was disbanded and Operation Paperclip was handed over to the Research and Engineering Department of the Pentagon. And they would soon create the ICBM, or the Intercontinental Ballistic Missiles, what was called the truly revolutionary offspring to Hitler's V-2 rocket. These missiles were capable of carrying a weapon of mass destruction in its nose cone and delivering it just about anywhere in the world.
Yay.
Super comforting. Yeah. Yay. So the division of the Pentagon today produces weapons and counter-weapons of mass destruction, all to prepare us for the next war, what is known as our military-industrial complex. In his farewell address, President Eisenhower warned of this complex and the dangers of allowing a very select few scientists and technologists holding all the knowledge and power in the world just out of reach of the rest of us. He specifically mentioned to the director of the Research and Engineering Department, when asked who he was speaking of, that he meant von Braun and Edward Teller, who was the father of the hydrogen bomb.
Yay! A lot of the programs with the Nazis were abject failures, and declassified documents revealed that people like Dr. Schreiber were double-crossing the Americans from the moment he began working with the Army.
Oh, no. Well. You don't say.
What? Such an upstanding citizen. So truthful. Truthful.
I thought we could trust the German... What am I saying? I thought we could trust a Nazi shithead to work for us. We were only enemies like 3 weeks ago.
I know. Let bygones be bygones, Ashley.
I'm sure they can let go of a grudge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shortly after he was let go, the United States began stockpiling sarin gas weapons in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and in their Rocky Mountain arsenal.
Since most information about the biological and chemical weapons was highly classified, few people outside of a core group of congressmen even knew about it, which allowed these few men to slip huge amounts of funding into unrelated bills at the last minute, knowing that their colleagues wouldn't be able to get around to reading it, which we know happens all the goddamn time now. It's just a thing, all sorts of little shit-ass things get slipped into the end of bills. Right at the last moment, because no one's reading 17,000 pages,
Yep.
I just really can't stand that. And that's just how it works for as long as it's been around, probably. Anyway.
In 1957, the Chemical Corps of Engineers chemists discovered an insecticide that penetrated the skin like snake venom, nicknamed 15. 10 milligrams could kill a man in 15 minutes.
Yikes.
they began producing this 15 in place of sarin. They continued working on mind control research, but also amped up their research on their assassination by poison program. Some of the CIA's targets with this program were Fidel Castro, who they attempted to poison several times, along with Patrice Lumumba, the first legally elected prime minister of the Congo, who the CIA thought was a Soviet puppet.
They also had a vapor toxicity branch, which was concerned with the inhalation toxicity of combustion products, researching how biological and chemical agents became even more dangerous when smoke and gas were involved. This included the development of Agent Orange, which was an anti-plant weapon used by the military during the Vietnam War, which not only defoliated the trees and the crops, but it caused long-term damage to those that inhaled it, particularly a shit ton of children. In addition to the anti-plant biological weapons were the anti-animal and anti-man, which were pretty self-explanatory, but aimed at wiping out entire populations of animals or man. The anti-animal warfare was aimed at starving to death human populations after wiping out the animals that they relied on for sustenance, and at the center of this research was one of those fast-tracked Operation Paperclip Nazis, Dr. Erich Traub.
All of the agents he created to accomplish this task back in the 40s and 50s was still classified at the time of the book we're reading's publishing in 2013.
So we still have no idea what they even did.
As stated before, we, the United States, that is, abhorred that we were using Nazis to continue doing work for us. And because of that, Operation Paperclip existed in the shadows. A majority of the scientists maintained anonymity for decades, but some of them, especially the scientists whose work crossed over from weapons to space-related aspirations, were fond of the limelight that they received. For Walter Dornberger, Werner von Braun, and Hubertus Strughold, this was the case. In 1958, the FBI opened an investigation into General Dornberger based on an insider's tip that he might be engaged in secret discussions with communist spies. The special agent who interviewed Dornberger did not believe he was spying for the Soviets, but honed in on Dornberger's duplicitous nature. It is believed that subject Dornberger could carry on satisfactorily in the role of a double agent. Dornberger was a cunning man, and this quality, coupled with his scientific acumen, served him. No matter what the circumstances, Dornberger always seemed to come out on top.
You don't say.
Werner von Braun became the biggest celebrity out of the paperclip scientists.
Mm-hmm.
In response to the Soviet Union's Sputnik, von Braun and his team launched Explorer 1 as America's first successful space satellite on April 15, 1955. In 1960, von Braun and about 120 Operation Paperclip scientists, engineers, and technicians were transferred to the newly established National Aeronautics and Space Administration. NASA.
I'm sorry that I was like, I know that one.
In order to build the rockets that were to take man to the moon. His deputy developer was Arthur Rudolph, the former operations director at the Middelburg slave labor facility.
Boo, bitch.
Now, with his newfound fame, it was imperative that von Braun also avoided his sordid past. He told a reporter that he had been coerced into joining the Nazi Party and didn't ever talk about the fact that he was in the SS in 1933 and he was made an SS officer in 1944. So super menial details about your past.
Yeah.
Not important. I forgot what I had for breakfast yesterday, so, I mean, I get it. Sure. I get it.
It's just a matter of fucking killing
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's menial.
Mass genocide is all.
Nah. What? That's it? That's fine. After the Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969, Drew Pearsons wrote an expose regarding von Braun, hoping to get him ousted from the U.S., but because of von Braun's success, his article went pretty unnoticed. Following Apollo, von Braun moved into the private sector, where he was a defense contractor. In 1973, he wanted to take up flying, and it required a physical and an X-ray. And in this x-ray, a dark shadow appeared on his kidney.
Boom,
He
bitch!
had terminal cancer, but would survive an additional 4 years.
Okay.
That's fine. He's gone. He gone.
Okay. Okay, I just really hate these fucking guys. So in November of 1969, Nixon announced the end of all offensive biological warfare research, at least officially, because what the hell do we really know, you know? It took over 30 years and billions of dollars for the Army to come up with a way to destroy and dispose of all their chemical agent munitions, and they claim to be proud of the process that they created, but what a goddamn waste. I mean, for real. All the money that and time and effort spent on all of these things, and then they're just destroyed. I just don't understand.
Done. Yeah.
The 70s brought a shift to the public's ideas and opinions of the Holocaust as people were confronted with the true horrors of what went on through documentaries and congressional oversight hearings, which were commenced regarding the Nazis. This made people really confront what the genocide of over 6 million people really meant in a way that they had sadly never done previously. Eventually, Arthur Rudolph, that blowhard, was investigated more thoroughly and told to either lawyer up for the trial or renounce his U.S. citizenship. So that little bitch baby moved right back to Germany post-haste. Yeah, I mean, they're just such little bitches. They really are. I mean, I can't blame you for running off, but still, you're a bitch. A journalist, Linda Hunt, began requesting FOIA documents regarding Operation Paperclip, getting legal help to do so, paying thousands of dollars, and persisting. And that's the only way that they even gave her some of the limited documents that they did. But it was becoming more and more clear to the public that Operation Paperclip wasn't an innocent endeavor with innocent German scientists. These were some of the most heinous Nazi war criminals in existence, and they had been, as we've repeated over and over and over, employed by the goddamn U.S. government, and in many cases, they were making insane amounts of money, some of them $1 million a year back in
At that time.
Yes. Like, holy shit. They were making friends with officials and living in the lap of luxury here in America because they had big old brainies. Aww. In the years since Operation Paperclip ended, there have been numerous situations regarding the scientists who were convicted at Nuremberg and then released early by U.S. officials, particularly that little bitch McCloy, showing the destruction that they caused even after the Holocaust. For example, Otto Ambrose had been tied to a thalidomide tragedy that took place in the 50s and 60s, where a new tranquilizer targeted at getting rid of pregnant women's morning sickness with no adverse effects on the mother or baby was released. Ambrose was the chairman for the company and repeatedly ignored signs that the drugs caused all sorts of issues with those taking it, especially to the fetus. In the end, the drug resulted in over 10,000 babies being born with terrible deformities in one of the greatest pharmaceutical catastrophes in modern medicine. What's up?
I've heard of this.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
They were born with, like, flippers and...
I know.
Mm-hmm. No ears.
I'm like, what is this? I've heard of this.
Yeah.
It's so sad, dude.
Right. It's terrible. I mean, it was just reckless is what it was, because they just don't care.
Mm-hmm.
The records for this drug indicate it was one of the most produced drugs at Dierenfurth by none other than I.G. Farben under the leadership of Ambrose back in Germany.
I think there's a documentary on that I watched.
Oh, really?
It had to have been like a few years ago.
Wow.
Fuck, I don't remember what it was called. I'll have to look it up. Yeah, there was a documentary that I watched, and I was like floored that fucking happened. And wasn't that was here too?
Yeah, No, that was here. Yeah, but the drug had initially been mass produced in Germany at Dierenfurth concentration camp.
Okay. Sorry.
I mean, it's crazy. No, that's fine. Most documents regarding this type of research conducted by the Nazi scientists remains classified, so we don't even really fucking know what they were doing or what really came of it, a lot of it. And getting access to it, even with FOIA requests, is difficult due to bureaucratic bullshit, but new names and information are coming to light little by little each year. Yet, many space clubs and institutes continue to give awards with names honoring these Nazi shitbags who committed unspeakable crimes against humanity in the name of science. To this day. It is, as we've seen, the mind of a scientist that allows the distinction between a madman and a man working for scientific progress. I'm just not sure that it's entirely reasonable. Is it a pragmatic way to look at things where you just separate the science from the man?
It's like the whole, can you separate the music from the artist?
Right.
Type situation.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not to trivialize it,
yeah,
but
right.
It's kind of that kind of a situation.
Mm-hmm.
Can you separate the fact that so much research and so much progress has been made due to these atrocities?
Right.
Personally, I'm like, well, I'm glad that we have the research that we have.
Yeah.
And it sounds so terrible to say out loud. But that's my personal opinion. Mm-hmm. Obviously, everybody is entitled to theirs. Mm-hmm. However, that's how I feel. I feel like, well,
right.
I'm glad that we have the research that we do have.
Well, okay.
I know.
Well, as we asked last episode, when do the ends justify the means? Is this whitewashing of a brutal and reprehensible history acceptable if it helped us develop warfare to keep us safe, to get to the moon, to develop vaccines for illnesses that plague society? Like I said last episode, do we need people like that in society that are so pragmatic that they are able to separate morality from progress? You know, where do we draw the lines from who is a murderer and who is a scientist? Does real progress sometimes take a human to become a robot with no morals or empathy who can act as a cold scientific mind and that's it? I think that's something that we can only answer within ourselves, probably. I mean, like you said, you're glad for the progress. I think that there's a lot of things that were probably done. Like it was said, there was a lot of failure and just like absolute nothing gained from some of the shit that they were doing, for sure. Some of it, right. You know, but
Unit 731, that there was like a lot of information that they said was useless.
Yeah.
From that.
Right. So, you know, I think it's just something that we all have to answer. I think that probably it really depends on the kind of person that you are, you know, like somebody who is more of a scientific mind might say, well, the ends do justify the means because we have to figure this stuff out. And then there's going to be some people who are on the complete opposite end of the spectrum where you're like, absolutely not. Nothing is okay to treat a human life that way. And trivialize a human life that way, which I understand both. And I think that I probably fall somewhere in the pathetic middle where I have no moral convictions because I'm just like, well, maybe sometimes I just don't know. I mean, that's a good place to stand is as a neutral a neutral observer. I would like to say I try to come at it from like a logical perspective, but I can't. I still think the Nazis are shitbags, pieces of shit. Shit. Yeah.
No. Of course. That goes
obviously
without.
Right.
There's absolutely no question about that.
Could we do these experiments with willing participants? You know, is it possible to conduct these types of experiments with people who volunteer themselves instead of forcing people to do it? But like, as we saw in Nazi Germany, they were using so many people. There's there's no way that you would be able to make that kind of insane progress probably with volunteers, but it would just be slower. I don't know.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
Before we end this saga, I wanted to give a little update on what because our IG Farben, that was a huge player in this whole situation. I mean, we continue to work with them after the Third Reich was pummeled to the ground, and the company IG Farben that produced all of these chemical weapons, but they're still a company today. But in the United States, IG Farben was split into BASF, which is a company that I have seen, like, I think it's like a pharmaceutical type of company. And then Bayer is another offshoot of IG Farben. So while they may not be like the IG Farben, they are the modern day offshoot of them. And that's kind of a little weird to think about. I was just a little curious about that, what came about of that company. So what did we gain from the science that was derived from these Nazi scientists? What came about from their research? Under strughold, the guy that you talked about. The School of Aviation Medicine conducted pioneering studies on issues such as atmospheric control, the physical effects of weightlessness, and the disruption of normal time cycles that revolutionized existing notions concerning spaceflight. And obviously, like, as everybody knows, von Braun we got to the moon because of this science. So that's probably the biggest contribution that these Nazi scientists made to the world of aviation or medicine, etc. Mm-hmm. He also, that Strughold fella,
he proposed that space was present in small amounts that grew as altitude levels increased, rather than existing in remote regions of the atmosphere. And in between 1952 and 1954, he would oversee the building of the Space Cabin Simulator, which is a sealed chamber in which human test subjects were placed for extended periods of time in order to view the potential physical, astrobiological, and psychological effects of extra atmospheric flight.
So the space exploration part of it was definitely, like we're saying, the biggest contribution these Nazis made to our scientific communities. Okay.
So the information that we found was in the same book that we mentioned last time, which is Operation Paperclip, the secret intelligence program that brought Nazi scientists to America. The Unit 731 information, the additional information that I found was found on counterpunch.org and on allthat'sinteresting.com. And again, that particular information was extremely lightly touched upon because there's a lot of information to cover on Unit 731. So yeah, so also thank you guys so much for listening, and thank you for your continued patience as we take a couple of weeks between each episode. We're trying to get ahead of the ball here a little bit, and we'd like to get a week ahead of things. We both have a ton of things that are going on in our lives, and we're trying to bring the best, most in-depth coverage, as you're used to, of our topics as possible. We both have a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I swear, it's really the only stability I have in my life is you guys. So take that and run with it and treat me kindly.
Just love me.
Just love me. Please. Yeah.
We're really excited for October because we both love to research spooky topics. And we're really excited to get ready for discussions for like paranormal stuff, hauntings.
Yeah. If you have any personal stories, personal experiences, just like last year when we did the listener stories episode, I want to request all of your stories. If you didn't send them before, if you're a new listener and you have a paranormal experience of any kind, and we're talking any kind whatsoever, don't think it has to just be like a ghosty kind of thing. It can be absolutely any sort of activity you've experienced that's out of the realm of normal occurrences. Tell us. Send your stories. Please send your stories. We need them by October 5th. Yep. Give us your stories by October 5th. creepitrealpod@gmail.com. Send them over. Yeah, but thanks so much. We love you. Thanks for always supporting us. Share us with your friends and your coworkers and your gym buddies and anybody you know who might want to creep it real.
And we're getting super close to having 100 written reviews. Written 5-star reviews. We're, I think, 3 or 4 away from having 100. So
sheesh.
That'd be kind of cool if you guys submitted a written 5-star review. Even if you just said, cool.
Yeah.
Like, that'd be nice. If you
would bang.
Just, like, yeah.
Would bang 10 out of 10.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Also.
It would be. Okay. Okay, bye-bye. See you later. Creep it real.